Good evening and thanks for joining us. The top stories today. Still no agreement on a new virus relief package. We ask, do we really need another one? In the run-up to the election, a new report asks Americans if they're in better financial shape now than when President Trump came into office. We also look at how oil producers are preparing for a potential Biden victory. The latest in US-China tensions. China's Xinjiang region is in the spotlight, and Disney is involved. And the US stock markets continue their descent. We take a look at today's biggest losers. Senate Republicans say they'll vote on a $500 billion stimulus package later this week, but the Democrats have already rejected it. The House says it wants a much bigger package. But do we really need another one? And is the money going to the right places anyway? JP Morgan is now investigating employees for facilitating relief fraud on previous packages. Looks like its staff knowingly helped customers misuse Paycheck Protection Program loans and unemployment benefits. And then there's a problem with the massive debt burden facing generations of Americans. Who's going to pay for all the spending and how? I talked to Vance Ginn about it. He recently served as the Associate Director for Economic Policy at the Office of Management and Budget. He's now Chief Economist at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. I asked Vance if the added debt burden will outweigh any boost to GDP from the new package.
Well, I think one thing that we've seen over the last few years is that we had more economic growth when pro-growth policies were put in place by the Trump administration. When you think about the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, when you think about the deregulatory measures that were put in place, that really works. So now we're in a different situation when we have a recession that was really brought on by, COVID-19 and the resulting economic and fiscal policies that were put in place, and just the lockdowns in general. I think the key thing to getting people back to work and businesses operating again will be to reopen the economy, roll back the lockdowns, and put in pro-growth policies again that really can get us back to a situation where we have a very robust labor market where everyone, and in fact, the people at the lower income levels were growing at a faster rate. Their incomes are growing at a faster rate than those of the higher income levels. That's the way that we need to move forward.
And are you expecting these pro-growth programs to be put into place?
Well, we're still looking to see what happens between the Democrats who have a House bill that they passed a while back of about $3.5 trillion. Then you have this discussion now about $1 trillion being discussed in the Senate. And so that's a pretty far difference between the two. And so what will exactly be the specifics of these bills that's finally passed will be important to make sure that we have a way for people to get back on, back to their jobs, back to their normal way of living. I think that's what a lot of Americans want across the nation. And it's something that we need to get back to soon because many people are suffering, many families are suffering all across this country. And we need to get back to where we were just a few months ago.
Vance, appreciate your insights as always. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
And on the central bank side, does injecting more cash into the economy really solve the fundamental problem? Globally, we're seeing a record number of bankruptcies despite all the money we're printing and lending at low rates. The chief economist at the Tressis hedge fund, Daniel Lakaya, often says you can't fix a solvency problem with more liquidity. I asked him about it today.
Many citizens cannot understand why businesses are closing and bankruptcies are soaring in an environment in which central banks are injecting trillions of liquidity. The reason is the following. Those businesses are falling and those bankruptcies are being presented because sales are collapsing and costs remain high. Therefore, no amount of added liquidity, which basically means ability to borrow, is going to change the problem, the structural problem of those businesses. In fact, if some of them actually do access to more debt in order to try to surpass this situation for a while, what many find themselves is in a situation in which their debt goes through the roof, but their ability to repay it doesn't improve even when the economy recovers. So that's why it's so important to discern between liquidity injections, which basically allow governments to borrow cheaper and corporations to get cheaper access to credit, and the structural problems of small businesses and large companies as well that have to do with their solvency, which is their ability to continue to survive when the recovery in sales is not enough to cover the costs of operating.
And you tweeted out this morning that it looks like Germany will take on more debt next year. I know you're not a fan of it. You would like to see more supply-side stimulus, and I would like to ask, what has been your favorite supply-side stimulus that you've seen during the pandemic?
When we look at the economies that are recovering faster, the United States is surprising because not only the jobs recovery is quicker, we have seen unemployment fall to 8.4%, which is lower than what the Fed, for example, had for the entire of 2020. And the economy has been seeing upward revisions in growth. Why? Fundamentally because the measures that the government implemented throughout the crisis were directed towards allowing small businesses and families to maintain their ability to consume and their disposable income. So tax cuts and tax incentives that have allowed small businesses to survive, those that could. Obviously, there have been many that have closed, and households that have been able to pass the period in which unemployment soared while without suffering massive losses in their disposable income while they got back into the labor market. So those two elements have worked a lot better, for example, than what Germany has done, which is to massively bail out all of the businesses that it could. But what it's ended up doing is at the same time not allowing the recovery to be faster. And that again comes back to the point that we talk about all the time. It is not the same to drown in a sea of liquidity the structural problems of the economy than to allow the economy to go from bottom to the top and recover as quickly as it can. And I think that the United States so far is an example of that.
We just seem to keep seeing manifestations of these malpractices, as you always talk about. So, Daniel, appreciate your input as always. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Some economic news in the run-up to the election. First, a new survey says Americans are undecided which presidential candidate will be better for their personal finances. NTD's Phil Zoe has the details.
Americans are undecided on who to vote for when it comes to their personal finances. That's according to a new report from Bankrate.com. Mark Hamrick, senior economic analyst from Bankrate, told us Americans are split on President Trump.
How have Americans' personal finances fared since President Trump took office? And 26%, or about 1 in 4, said their finances are better. At the same time, a nearly equal number, 25%, said their finances are worse.
40% said they are in the same financial position, while fewer than 10% said they don't know.
Those who said that their finances had fared better tend to be male and white and Republican. On the other hand, those who said they're faring worse tend to be Black or female, and also those in lower income groups and Democrats.
We asked New Yorkers to see what they had to say.
I am undecided on who I'm voting for. I did vote for Trump the prior election. However, I voted for Obama previously, so I'm not a Republican nor a Democrat.
Hamrick says both Trump and Biden have an opportunity to win over the younger generation.
We found that younger Americans are more likely to be undecided.
Another New Yorker said she's not a fan of Trump, but that the other side doesn't sound good either.
I'm not a big fan of him in the first place on his views and how he represents himself, but sadly the other side's not as good as well. It just makes me sad. I was hoping there'd be a stronger Democratic side, but we got a little disappointed with that.
But one person told us he doesn't expect any financial problems. He has his mind made up.
I don't think I'm going to have that problem because I am with Trump 100%, and I really feel he's doing a good job.
The report ended by saying unemployment will likely remain higher than pre-pandemic levels.
No matter who gets voted into the White House, it will be smart to safeguard your finances. Phil Zhou, NTD News, New York.
And oil producers are scrambling for drilling permits ahead of the November presidential election. They could be worried that if Biden wins, he would clamp down on oil production. Federal permitting in one of the largest American oil fields is up 80% in the last 3 months. Biden was vocal against fracking before, but has backtracked recently and now says he doesn't want to ban it outright.
I am not banning fracking. Let me say that again. I am not banning fracking.
Biden said that at a campaign event in Pennsylvania, a hotly contested swing state. But his climate plan includes banning new oil and gas permits on public lands. Industry groups say that would hurt the economy and cut off an energy boom that has made the United States the world's largest crude oil producer. And the price of oil tumbled today, as did big tech stocks as well. Pulled the Nasdaq down over 4%. Apple, Microsoft, Amazon all falling, leading market watchers to say their tremendous gains were probably overdone. Tesla fell over 21%. It's on news it won't be joining the S&P 500 anytime soon. General Motors rose 8% after it announced it's partnering with electric vehicle company Nikola. Nikola surged nearly 41%. The Dow fell over 632 points, or 2.25%. S&P 500 lost over 95 points, or 2.78%, and the Nasdaq dropped over 465 points, or 4.11%. The U.S. will move to block imports of cotton and tomato products from China's Xinjiang region. It's over allegations they're produced with forced labor. The actions hit two of China's major commodity exports. U.S. Customs and Border Protection is expected to announce 5 other import bans of products related to Xinjiang forced labor. U.S. law requires the agency to detain shipments when there's an allegation of it. The Trump administration is increasing pressure on the Chinese regime over its treatment of Xinjiang's Uyghur ethnic minorities. The United Nations say it has credible reports that 1 million Uyghurs have been detained in camps. The Chinese Communist regime says the camps are just vocational training centers. An outrage online today as Disney's new movie Mulan gives special thanks to the authorities in Xinjiang. The movie is already under fire after its actress's support of Hong Kong police's suppression of the pro-democracy activists there.
It's prompted Hong Kong activists such as Joshua Wong to promote hashtags on social media like Boycott Mulan and Ban Mulan.
Especially, we realize how this new Disney movie also give the special thanks to the Xinjiang government who set up the re-education camp, which is the concentration camp that suppress on people in Xinjiang and those Uyghurs.
Since 2016, over 1 million Uyghurs have been detained in at least 500 prison camps known as re-education centers across Xinjiang. British MP Ian Duncan Smith says it's shameful that companies seem to turn a blind eye to China's human rights abuses.
The Disney company, it appears now, worked with the security services in Xinjiang province. But that is the place that the Uyghurs have suffered the most appalling abuse.
Several government organizations in Xinjiang appeared in the film's credits. One of them is the Chinese Communist Party's Propaganda Commission in Xinjiang. Another is a local branch of the region's Public Security Bureau. The film will be released on September 11th in China, an increasingly big market for Hollywood. Criticism began last year when Mulan star, mainland-born actress Liu Yifei expressed her support on social media for police in Hong Kong in the midst of anti-government protests. China's Foreign Ministry spokesman Zhao Lijian repeated Beijing's denial of the existence of re-education camps in Xinjiang.
And despite all of China's economic and social problems, Goldman Sachs says the Chinese yuan may become the world's 3rd largest reserve currency by 2030. I asked Joseph Trevisani if he thinks that's realistic. He's a senior analyst at FX Street.
Well, it's realistic in a sense that China is the 2nd largest economy in the world, and there will be reasons and occasion to use Chinese-denominated debt. Who is doing it and for what reasons are open to interpretation. I don't really know who's doing it, and it was certainly not illustrated or anything or talked about in the Morgan Stanley piece. But from an overall point of view for the world economy, I'm very doubtful that a country that is an authoritarian country that essentially sets its own rules will be accepted by the world financial community and the world financial economy as a reliable place to deposit your wealth. I just don't see it. In the United States or in Europe, the national bonds, the standards, when you get your money in, get you out, there's completely liquid markets. Everyone knows how to operate. They know the impact of exchanges in the foreign exchange rate. This has been going on for a long time. None of that applies to China. So I have my serious doubts that it will do anything more than creep higher in very specific circumstances.
And how important is building up the yuan as more of a reserve currency? How important is that to the Chinese regime's aspirations for global dominance?
Honestly, I think it's probably more important as a political talking point than it is anything else. I mean, yes, the United States benefits, there's no doubt about it, from having the world's reserve currency. But for China to get in that position, they would have to actually have an open economy the way the United States does, and they do not. And I do not see that type of financial openness occurring underneath the authoritarian government in Beijing. It's just not something that goes with that way of doing government, of doing business.
Joseph, appreciate your insights as always. Thanks so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And still to come this evening. Theatre and music venues in the United Kingdom can't get commercial insurance to cover the virus. The industry is now asking the government to step in and help. And Australia's competition regulator looks into Google and Apple's app stores. He wants to know how the tech giants use and share data. More on that after the break. British theatres and live music venues say the show will only go on if the government provides a financial backstop. They say they can no longer get commercial insurance because of the pandemic. NTD's Patrick Hayden has the story.
Theatres and concert halls in England have in theory been open to audiences since mid-August, but only a handful have opened, citing insurance as one of the main barriers. The managing director of Plaza says the risk is that the government will shut down events if there's a spike in virus cases.
From an insurance point of view, to say we need something that in the statute books that says actually for this period of time you can get insurance and it will include this particular clause.
He said the UK has already done a lot to help the industry, but more help is needed. Right now they're asking for the government to extend the furlough and to provide grants instead of loans.
And we're also requesting that the government look at extending the protection that's out there for the self-employed, because 70% of the people who work in our industry are self-employed.
We also spoke to the CEO of Audiotonics. He says sector-specific furlough schemes are needed until the venues can be filled to capacity.
I think a lot of other countries are taking the approach that the furlough schemes in their particular territories need to be sector-specific. So the financial support will run until that sector is able to go back to work.
He says social distancing has really hurt the industry.
Fundamentally, that reduces the capacity of the venue to somewhere between 25 and 30%, depending on the venue. And in reality, productions in theatres don't start making a break-even point until they get closer to the 80% capacity.
He suggests another programme similar to the UK's recent Eat Out to Help Out, but one that encourages people to get back to the theatres. Patrick Hayden, NTD News.
And Australia's competition regulator says it will look into competition between Apple and Google app stores. It'll also examine whether more price transparency is needed.
The Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, or ACCC, is interested in how data is used and shared by Google and Apple, considering the company's control over the major app stores. It said in a statement that it will also examine if there needs to be more price transparency in these stores. Google and Apple representatives did not respond to Reuters' requests for a comment. Regulators down under have been among the most aggressive in trying to rein in the U.S. tech giants, with Australia set to become the first country to make Facebook and Google pay for news sourced from local providers. The ACCC is inviting feedback from consumers to share their experiences buying and using apps. The survey is part of a 5-year inquiry, producing reports every 6 months. It's also seeking feedback from app developers and suppliers. The Commission's decision comes amid Apple's legal tussle with Epic Games, after the Fortnite creator implemented a feature to let iPhone users make in-app purchases directly, rather than using Apple's in-app purchase system. The iPhone maker had subsequently terminated Epic Games' account on its App Store.
The Consumer Electronics Show IFA has opened with a focus on how technology can help amid the pandemic.
The trade fair has been running since 1924. It regularly sees over 200,000 attendees in Berlin. But this year, only a few thousand journalists and trade visitors are allowed into the exhibition grounds. Those that do attend must wear masks and maintain social distance. Startups are focusing on breaking into the pandemic-related market with new technology for everything from making life at home more bearable to making better connections in the workplace. Berlin-based company Greenbox is trying to make your home life more comfortable with unique indoor gardens. They feature Bluetooth connectivity so users can care for their plants directly from their smartphones.
I mean, sometimes your apartment is just not bright enough to grow plants. And it's a perfect solution for someone who has a small home and, often dark apartments.
Elsewhere at the show, Danish robotics Govt says their Wi-Fi controlled robots can help those missing out on social contact while working from home.
They can use a robot to connect with their colleagues in the office. They can roam around the office, go to the coffee machine, and have these informal talks that you not normally can have over Skype and planned meetings.
While a company from South Korea called The Little Cat showed off devices that benefit customers' furry friends. The idea is simple. The cats spot an LED light at the front of the wheel. When they start chasing it, the wheel starts spinning and they get their daily exercise. While IFA managed to go on as planned, many other trade shows were canceled, like the MWC in Barcelona and the Motor Show in Geneva. 2021 CES convention has already been canceled, making IFA the only in-person trade show for the foreseeable future.
So this is the first tech conference back since Corona started, and it will provide a blueprint for how we move forward.
Nicole Scott, editor of the Mobile Geeks technology website, said it could become a blueprint for a new type of pandemic-proof hybrid technology show, with some attending in person and others watching online.
That's the latest business updates for today. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you tomorrow.